Hello, and welcome to Songs for the Struggling Artist, the blogcast. This is episode 363. My name is Emily Rainbow Davis. Thank you for listening to the blogcast. And today's blog is something I wrote after listening to a podcast. Not this podcast, because I generally know what's in here. But another podcast. I don't say what it is until like midway through the blog, but here on the podcast, why not? Who cares? The podcast I will be talking about is ICYMI, also known as In Case You Missed It. I have, in the past, enjoyed several episodes. More than several, quite a few. But it has taken a little bit of a turn, and that's essentially what this blog will be about. So let's get to it. It is called Internet Memories and Fandoms. At some point in my youth, my school brought in these kid news shows that we would watch at the start of the day. Logistically, I don't know how this was possible, as we were still in the AV cart era, and there surely weren't enough TVs for all of the classrooms. Maybe it was a weekly experience? I don't know. But I remember these kid reporters. They always seemed a little absurd to me, like they were playing reporter and taking it all a little too seriously. It felt a little like dressing up a pet in a costume and then making it read the news. It was kind of cute and also a little off. I was listening to a podcast recently that brought these kids' news networks to mind. It's a podcast about internet culture and is very much not made for me. I listen to it because sometimes it can explain internet mysteries I am too out of the loop to understand. Mr. Beast, West Elm Caleb, BYU Virgins, etc. These are all things I have sort of learned about. I like knowing things. I've listened to this podcast for a couple of years, and this is the first time the Kids News Network came to mind. I think it's because they've settled on some standard questions for their guests. And those questions make it clear that they are not speaking to me, or anyone in my generation, or older. It's kids talking to kids, I guess. Except, of course, they are not kids. They are full-grown adults with their own apartments, and this podcast is their job. The first question that they will henceforth be asking all of their guests is, what is your first internet memory? Inevitably, these answers take the interviewee back to their childhood. They begin with things like, in the 3rd grade, I snuck on my family's computer. And I don't know how I, a Gen Xer, would answer this question. I heard a lot about the internet before it became available to me, and even then, it was in little bursts. I'd been anticipating email for years before we finally got it at my college for my senior year. I had a scintillating email exchange with a guy at another college that had been set up by a mutual friend. Is that an internet memory? Not really. I got a Hotmail account in the late 90s, which was about all I could manage because I was mostly on the road. I finally got a computer that could connect me to the internet in maybe 2000. None of these are like, ooh, the impact of the internet kind of memories. I think this is because I was an adult when the internet became a thing I had access to. Maybe others in my generation have better, more fun memories, like those who were into computers and had modems in the early days. But mostly, you're not going to get good early internet stories out of Gen X. The second question they ask on the Kids News Network, sorry, that's not fair, it's ICYMI, is, what was your first fandom? I am intrigued by this question because of all the assumptions baked into it. It assumes that everyone they speak to will have been a part of a fandom of some kind, and not just one either. I've been thinking about this fandom question for a while now, and wondering about why the generations after us are such stans. I have been fascinated by how unironically the generations after me have loved what they love for some time. Before I started thinking about fandoms, I had noticed how almost every millennial had read and loved Harry Potter as a child. It seems absolutely foundational to their whole generation. There is not a book that everyone read when I was a kid. There is not a movie we all saw, and there was not a TV show we all watched. There were things a lot of folks saw or read or listened to, but we liked what we liked, and for the most part, we didn't form our communities around those things. The only fandoms I can think of were deadheads and fishheads. For the most part, our communities were local and connected to the people we had access to nearby. We liked stuff, some of it passionately, but we didn't necessarily group up around things. I'm trying to imagine who I might have been a part of the fandom for. Maybe Crowded House or Suzanne Vega. I really loved Tori Amos when she emerged on the scene, but I never went to a concert, and I would have been embarrassed to be as public about my interest in her as I've seen millennials be. We've all heard of the power of K-pop fans and Swifties by now. It's a thing. I loved Duran Duran in my youth, but I was not a Duranie, and no one I knew would have claimed that status, even if they were crazy for Duran Duran. Fan clubs were a mail-order experience, and I didn't know anyone in one. Fandom is absolutely mysterious to me, and I suspect this is because of the internet. I think the folks at Kids News Network asked what their guests' first fandom was because that's the way they formed communities as children. Identities were formed online, in fan spaces. You found your people in your favorite show's chat room. Or something. I literally don't know. It's a very sensible question for people younger than me, and it may explain a kind of uniformity of taste that has tended to happen in the last 20 years or so. If you get your community from people all liking the same stuff, it makes sense that there is a kind of value in conformity and bonding together over a band, for example. In my formative years, no one loved anyone as uniformly as Beyoncé is loved by her generation. Madonna was very popular, and I loved her too, but she was equally loathed as she was loved. If millennials decide they love you, get ready, because eventually they will all turn up. Not really, I know, but it seems that way from here, certainly. Is Gen Z the same? I don't know. You'd have to ask the folks on the Internet Culture podcast, I guess. I suspect that this fandom arts culture that we have now is entirely driven by how things developed on the internet. It is internet-based love and community. I find it fascinating and also foreign. It's a curious sensation to feel so outside a conversation, to be able to understand all the words and begin to realize how different our generational realities can be. Hearing about generational commonalities around the internet and fandom makes me feel our differences in a way I don't often think about. There's just something about it that makes it feel like I'm learning about a new trend on the Kids News Network. So I learned something in searching for a song for this one. I thought I'd do a song about being a fan or internet or something. I was really casting around widely. And I thought about I Googled, I think at one point, stans, because this is the thing I learned, on Twitter, I don't know, however many years ago, about people who say they're a stan for someone. They are a big fan. Now, all of the younger generations are all like, yeah, Emily, God, you're so old. But for my listeners who are my age and older, a stan is a big, giant fan for someone, something, whatever. And I have felt like, oh, yes, I know the words. I have the lingo. La, 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 la. And, but I was like, wait a second. So when I was looking for songs about being a fan, I found a song called Stan by Eminem, which of course I've heard before. I have heard the song before. And I was like, gee whiz, is this why people call themselves stans for someone? And yes, it is. I looked it up on Know Your Meme. It is, in fact, from this song. But it's kind of weird because the song is about someone who is, a crazy fan of Eminem. And, it ends tragically. And it's just a weird thing to have caught on. To call yourself a stan is to call yourself a super creepy, overly invested fan. But I guess people are into that. I don't know. Anyway, I learned about it, and for those younger than me, I'm sorry, I'm so behind. And for those who are along with me, who already knew, I'm also sorry. But for those of you who were wondering, like me, what the heck was going on, now there you have it. It's anyway, it's a lot of that stuff is super weird to me. It's just beyond my experience and understanding. Which is not to say I don't like things. I think a lot of things are really great. And I would say I was a fan of them, but I think that maybe means something different to other generations than it does to me. I don't know. I'm figuring it out. If I understand everything, I will explain it to you later. So what song to put here? I obviously could not cover Eminem's Stan, although that would have been the choice, I think. But there's nothing that I could have done with that. So I started to think about the news and news networks and the Kids News Network. So then I looked up songs about news. I learned sort of Secondhand News by Fleetwood Mac, which I was stunned and delighted to learn only had 3 chords. I literally said out loud when I found the chords, how did I get so lucky? And then I tried to play it. I played it a bunch of times, but I got so bored. You know how many times they sing bam chick bam 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 bam, like so many times. You cannot, in the chord charts that I found, they were times 4 after one of them, and I was like, wow, I don't think I can do bam 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 4 times. So I ended up going with an Elvis Costello song about the news, sort of. It's a little bit of a reach, but actually Secondhand News would have been too. They only start talking about the news at the very end. It's mostly a song about making out in the grass, I think. But Fish and Chip Papers is this Elvis Costello song, which I have loved a long time, although I will confess I did not know what Fish and Chip Papers meant. Because I suppose I understood that things moved from the news to fish and chips, but I did not realize that literally people would wrap their fish and chips in newspapers. So it's actually much more literal than I imagined when I was growing up listening to this song. I had to learn a little bit more about British culture before I understood this song completely. But I do think there's something about the sort of cycles that things move from, the before to something else. It feels like the metaphor is more potent when we had actual literal newspapers, and now it's like things cycle through the internet in a weird way where like they turn into something else as time goes by. I don't know. I saw this amazing video of this group of men in suits dancing to a song, and I was like, oh, this video is great. And then I tried to find the source of the video, and it took a lot of searching. And once I did, I discovered that this video had a previous viral moment a year ago. So who knows when the actual video was taken. But like every new iteration of it is like, oh, it's brand new. Look at these guys. It seems like it happened yesterday. In like 10 years, that video is going to go around again. Anyway, I don't know. So I'm going to play you Fish and Chip Papers very shortly. Meanwhile, thank you so much for listening. If you like this blogcast, please tell someone about it. Like, review, subscribe. If you'd like to support it with your dollars, that would be amazing. Hey, my birthday's coming up. Patreon.com/Emily R. Davis. There's also Ko-fi. There's PayPal. All those links are in the show notes. Also, I am on Substack, although I have no paid subscribers just yet. So I'm a little bit behind in posting stuff over there. But if Substack is your thing, then just add me to your list, Yeah. So thank you also for listening, really and truly. Means a lot. So, do I have anything else to tell you about Fish and Chip Papers? I don't think so. I'm playing it on guitar, and it's a very short little song. So enjoy the next 2.5 minutes. Sunday morning dandruff turns out to be confetti, and the cost of living in sin would make a poor man out of Paul Getty. The girl of your dreams would have you up on an underage charge, and the man of the moment is a lifer at large. If you've got something to hide, if you've got something to sell, if you've got somebody's pride, you might kiss and tell, or wind up with a fight fan in the Hammersmith Hotel. You better speak up now if you want your peace. You better speak up now, it won't mean a thing later. Yesterday's news is tomorrow's fish and chip paper. Girl says she's leaving, and this time she really means it. You can just look at the pictures, you don't actually have to read it. A man in the laundrette is looking through your underwear for clues, and the milkman is working through the news of the screw. He says, if you've got something to hide, if you've got something to sell, if you've got somebody's pride, you might kiss and tell, or wind up with a fight fan in the Hammersmith Hotel. You better speak up now if you want your peace. You better speak up now, it don't mean a thing later. Yesterday's news is tomorrow's fish and chip paper. If you've got something to hide, if you've got something to sell, if you've got somebody's pride, you might kiss and tell, or wind up with a fight fan in the hand.